What if I told you some of America's favorite foods were never meant to exist? That potato chips were born from a chef's anger. That chocolate chip cookies were a mistake. And that cotton candy was invented by a dentist? These delicious accidents shaped history in ways no one could have predicted. Some of the most iconic foods in history weren't created in fancy kitchens or through years of careful planning. Instead, they were born out of accidents, mistakes, and even a little forgetfulness. From a chef's frustration that gave us potato chips, to a child's experiment that turned into popsicles, these happy accidents shaped the way America eats and celebrates today. In this video, we'll uncover 15 foods that were never meant to exist, but ended up changing our tables, our traditions, and even our culture. These stories remind us that sometimes the best things in life happen completely by chance. This is the America we remember. What if I told you America's favorite salty snack started not as a recipe, but as an act of pure annoyance? The story begins in 1853 at Moon's Lake House in Saratoga Springs, New York. A wealthy customer, some say it was railroad magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt, kept sending his fried potatoes back to the kitchen, complaining they were too thick and soggy. The chef, George Crumb, grew increasingly frustrated. In a fit of irritation, he sliced the potatoes paper thin, fried them until crisp, and doused them in salt. It was meant to mock the customer, not to please him. But to everyone's surprise, the customer loved them. Soon, other diners began asking for the Saratoga chips, and just like that, a new American classic was born. Potato chips quickly spread beyond Saratoga, first as a regional specialty and later as a national obsession. By the early 20th century, they were being mass-produced and packaged, making them one of the most accessible and affordable snacks in America. What began as one chef's petty revenge became a billion-dollar industry, shaping the very idea of snacking. Potato chips weren't just food. They were fun, casual, and perfect for a country that loved to eat on the go. The shocking twist is that potato chips were never meant to be invented. They came from frustration, not inspiration. George Crumb could never have imagined that his thinly sliced potatoes would one day sit in nearly every American pantry. For generations, opening a bag of chips has meant comfort, crunch, and a reminder that even life's accidents can turn into traditions we can't imagine living without. And while potato chips came from a chef's annoyance, another iconic treat was born from something far more innocent. The forgotten experiment of an 11-year-old boy. Sometimes history's sweetest discoveries don't come from scientists or chefs, but from a child's simple mistake. In 1905, an 11-year-old boy named Frank Epperson accidentally stumbled upon what would become one of America's favorite frozen treats. One chilly night in Oakland, California, Frank left a cup of soda powder mixed with water outside on the porch. Inside the cup sat a stirring stick. By morning, the liquid had frozen solid around the stick, creating what we would later know as the very first popsicle. Frank called it an Epsicle, after himself, and shared it with friends. Years later, as an adult, he patented the idea and began selling the frozen novelty under a new name, the Popsicle. The Popsicle quickly became a hit, especially during the hot summer months. Affordable, refreshing, and fun to eat, it was the perfect treat for children and families during the roaring 20s and beyond. By the Great Depression, the Popsicle was being sold in twin stick form for just 5 cents, allowing kids to share with a friend or stretch a nickel just a little further. It wasn't just a frozen snack. It was a piece of childhood joy during difficult times. The shocking part is that one of the world's most iconic frozen desserts was born entirely by accident, thanks to a child who simply forgot to bring his drink inside. What began as a frozen mistake turned into a symbol of summer, youth, and nostalgia. To this day, every time someone enjoys a popsicle, they're part of a tradition that started on a cold California night over a century ago. And while popsicles came from a child's curiosity, another beloved food was created in a much more serious place, a sanitarium kitchen, where a mistake with wheat dough changed breakfast forever. One of the most famous cereals in American history wasn't invented in a laboratory. It was discovered in a moment of kitchen clumsiness. The year was 1894, and brothers Dr. John Harvey Kellogg and Keith Kellogg were running a sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan. The facility promoted strict vegetarian diets as part of its health philosophy. One day, while preparing a batch of boiled wheat for their patients, the Kellogg's accidentally left it sitting out too long. When they returned, the wheat had gone stale. Rather than throwing it away, they decided to press the dough through rollers. To their surprise, the stale wheat didn't form a sheet, it flaked. When baked, these flakes turned out crisp and tasty, and the patients loved them. The Kellogg's soon repeated the experiment with corn, which produced even better results. Thus, corn flakes were born. Corn flakes quickly grew beyond the sanitarium walls. By the early 1900s, Kellogg saw the potential to market this simple, ready-to-eat cereal to the broader public. At a time when breakfasts often consisted of heavy meats and fried foods, corn flakes offered something new, light, quick, and easy to prepare. It was a perfect match for the busy lifestyles of modern America, and it helped spark the entire breakfast cereal industry, changing the way millions of families began their day. The shocking twist is that corn flakes, a product eaten by generations of American children, came from food that was essentially spoiled. What started as an accident in a sanitarium kitchen turned into a global brand that still sits on grocery store shelves more than a century later. It's a reminder that even mistakes can shape the way a nation eats. And while corn flakes came from a forgotten pot of wheat, another sweet American classic was born from a baker who ran out of the one ingredient she needed most, baking chocolate. Sometimes the greatest desserts come not from perfect planning, but from running out of the very ingredient you need most. In the 1930s, Ruth Wakefield ran the Toll House in Whitman, Massachusetts, a popular stop for travelers who loved her home cooking. One day, while baking a batch of chocolate cookies, Ruth realized she was out of baker's chocolate. Instead of abandoning the recipe, she chopped up a Nestle semi-sweet chocolate bar and mixed the pieces into her dough. She expected the chocolate to melt and spread evenly, creating a uniform flavor. But instead, the chunks softened, held their shape, and created little pockets of gooey sweetness. The result was unlike anything people had tasted before, the very first batch of chocolate chip cookies. The new cookie quickly became a sensation, beloved by guests at the Toll House Inn and beyond. Word spread fast, and Nestle took notice. In 1939, Nestle began printing Wakefield's recipe on its chocolate bar wrappers, and later even introduced chocolate chips specifically for baking. What began as one-woman substitution became the blueprint for the most popular homemade cookie in America. Today, the chocolate chip cookie is more than just dessert. It's a piece of Americana, tied to family kitchens, bake sales, and childhood memories. The shocking twist is that one of America's most beloved desserts, a symbol of comfort itself, almost didn't exist. It was created not out of genius or innovation, but from necessity and improvisation. Without Ruth Wakefield's quick thinking, the warm, melty chocolate chip cookie might never have made its way into American homes. For countless families, it's a reminder that even small substitutions can change the course of culinary history. And while chocolate chip cookies came from a shortage of ingredients, another world-changing food began because one man couldn't pull himself away from a card game. One of the simplest meals in the world was never meant to be a culinary invention at all. It was simply a way to keep one man's hands clean while he gambled. In the 18th century, John Montague, the fourth Earl of Sandwich, had a notorious love for gambling. He often played cards for hours without wanting to pause for a meal. Legend has it that, in 1762, he asked his servant to bring him salted beef tucked neatly between two slices of bread. The bread acted as a convenient wrapper, letting him eat without greasy fingers interrupting his game. Other gamblers soon began ordering the same as sandwich, and before long, the term sandwich stuck. What started as a quirky convenience became a revolution in how people ate. The sandwich was portable, tidy, and endlessly adaptable. It was a natural fit for the industrial age, as workers needed meals that could be eaten quickly and without utensils. From picnic baskets to lunchboxes, the sandwich became a universal staple, especially in America, where its variations, from the peanut butter and jelly classic to towering deli creations, became icons of everyday life. It's almost hard to believe that something so ordinary, the sandwich we pack for school, road trips, or a day at work, owes its name and fame to a gambler who simply didn't want to leave the table. This accidental creation reshaped the way the world eats, proving once again that convenience often drives invention. But while the sandwich kept one man at the card table, another accidental discovery would bring soldiers and adventurers to life with just a single fizzing sip. Before soda became the sweet, bubbly drink we know today, it began as a doctor's cure-all, a tonic meant to heal the sick rather than delight the thirsty. In the early 19th century, pharmacists experimented with carbonated water, believing its effervescence carried health benefits. They added mineral salts, herbs, and syrups, creating concoctions meant to treat ailments ranging from headaches to digestive troubles. These bubbly mixtures were sold at soda fountains inside drugstores, where Americans gathered not only for medicine, but also for a refreshing treat. Some of the most famous sodas, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper, actually started out as medicinal tonics, advertised as remedies for fatigue and even nervous disorders. At a time when reliable medicine was scarce, these fizzy tonics felt like modern miracles. They were affordable, widely available, and offered both taste and hope. As the recipes became sweeter and more palatable, soda shifted from pharmacy counters to family kitchens. By the mid-20th century, soda had become a symbol of Americana, served at diners, paired with hamburgers, and shared at drive-in theaters. What began as medicine had transformed into one of the most beloved refreshments of all time. The irony is striking. What was once marketed as a cure for illness is now often criticized for contributing to health problems like obesity and diabetes. Yet for millions of Americans, soda still carries the taste of nostalgia. The hiss of a bottle cap, the sparkle of bubbles, and the memory of simpler days when sharing a Coke meant more than just drinking sugar water. But while soda bubbled up from pharmacy counters, another sweet accident happened in a much humbler kitchen, when burnt sugar gave birth to something far more delightful. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come from mistakes, and caramel is the sweet proof that burning sugar can lead to something delicious. Caramel's origins go back centuries, but its discovery was almost certainly an accident. Early cooks, experimenting with sugar over heat, would sometimes leave it on the fire too long. Instead of throwing away the burnt result, they tasted it, and found that sugar's transformation into a golden, nutty, slightly bitter treat had its own special charm. By the 18th and 19th centuries, caramel became a staple in American kitchens, showing up in candies, puddings, and sauces. Caramel was inexpensive to make, required only sugar and heat, and could elevate the simplest dessert. Homemakers poured it over custards, swirled it into fudge, or used it to flavor popcorn. Unlike more complicated sweets, caramel didn't need imported spices or rare ingredients, just patience and a steady hand at the stove. Its versatility meant it could be enjoyed by both wealthy households and families scraping by during harder times. But caramel carried a risk. 1 second too long on the stove, and it turned from golden to bitter black. Many children grew up with a memory of kitchens filled with the smell of burnt sugar, both a disappointment and a reminder of how fine the line was between failure and success. Yet for those who got it right, caramel wasn't just candy, it was comfort, celebration, and even a little bit of magic melted into sweetness. And just like caramel, another kitchen accident gave us a snack that would one day become a global favorite, all thanks to a humble bowl of corn. Who could have guessed that heating a hard little kernel of corn would explode into one of the world's most beloved snacks? Popcorn has been around for thousands of years, first enjoyed by indigenous peoples of the Americas long before it reached modern kitchens. Archaeologists have even found popcorn remnants over 5,000 years old. But its widespread popularity in America came later, when settlers and farmers discovered that certain types of corn popped when heated. During the 19th century, popcorn was cheap, easy to make, and quickly became a favorite treat sold at fairs, circuses, and later, movie theaters. What made popcorn special was how little it cost compared to other snacks. Families during lean times could still enjoy a warm, filling bowl made right over the stove or fireplace. And when paired with a bit of butter, sugar, or salt, it felt like a luxury without the high price tag. Popcorn's rise in theaters during the 20th century also made it inseparable from the movie-going experience, turning a humble farm crop into a cultural icon. But here's the surprise. Popcorn wasn't always welcomed everywhere. In the early days of cinema, theater owners resisted it, fearing the smell and sound would ruin the experience. Yet when the Great Depression hit, popcorn sales skyrocketed. At just 5 cents a bag, it became the affordable joy that kept both families and theaters afloat during hard times. What started as an accident of nature ended up saving more than a few livelihoods. And while popcorn burst into popularity by chance, another mistake in the kitchen gave us something creamy and cool, the treat we know today as ice cream cones. Sometimes the sweetest inventions are born in the heat of the moment, quite literally. It was the summer of 1904 at the St. Louis World's Fair. Vendors from around the world were showing off their foods, inventions, and traditions. Ice cream, already a beloved American treat, was a huge hit at the fair. But there was one big problem. The vendors began to run out of bowls. Faced with growing lines and impatient crowds, ice cream sellers scrambled for a solution. That's when inspiration struck. Right next door, a Syrian vendor named Ernest Hamwi was selling thin, crisp pastries called zalabia. To help his neighbor, Hamwi rolled one of his pastries into a cone shape, handed it over, and filled it with ice cream. The crowd loved it, and the ice cream cone was born. The ice cream cone turned out to be more than just a quick fix. It offered convenience, portability, and a bit of fun. No bowls to wash, no spoons required. It spread rapidly from fairs to soda fountains and eventually became a symbol of summertime in America. Children could now enjoy ice cream on the go, and families made it part of picnics, outings, and celebrations. But here's the twist. The ice cream cone's origins sparked decades of debate. Several different vendors at the same fair later claimed to have invented it. Was it Hamwi with his zalabia? Another vendor with waffle-like batter? Or someone else entirely? To this day, no one knows for sure who truly created the first cone. What we do know is that one desperate moment of improvisation gave us a dessert tradition that endures to this day. And while the ice cream cone sweetened America's summers, another accidental discovery in a factory kitchen gave us a treat far more indulgent: chocolate chip cookies. One of America's most beloved desserts wasn't carefully invented. It was a kitchen mishap that became a worldwide sensation. In the 1930s, Ruth Wakefield ran the Toll House in Whitman, Massachusetts, a place known for hearty meals and comforting desserts. One day, while baking a batch of chocolate cookies, she ran out of baker's chocolate. Instead, she chopped up pieces of a Nestle semi-sweet chocolate bar and stirred them into the dough, expecting them to melt evenly and create chocolate-flavored cookies. But to her surprise, the chocolate chunks held their shape. Instead of uniform chocolate cookies, she had golden brown treats dotted with gooey, melted bits of chocolate. The guests at her Inn loved them, and soon, the recipe became the Inn's signature dessert. The cookies spread quickly, first by word of mouth, then across the country when Nestle caught wind of the recipe. In fact, Ruth eventually struck a deal with Nestle. They printed her Toll House cookie recipe on every bag of their chocolate chips, and in return, she received a lifetime supply of chocolate. What started as a baking blunder became the birth of America's favorite homemade cookie. The twist? Ruth Wakefield never set out to create something new. She just needed a workaround in her kitchen, and that small act of improvisation created a dessert so iconic that it would become part of American family traditions for generations. From lunchboxes to holiday platters, the chocolate chip cookie remains a symbol of comfort, all thanks to a simple mistake. But while the chocolate chip cookie came from a happy accident in a Massachusetts inn, another sweet discovery was found completely by chance, inside a candy factory. Sometimes, the perfect pairing isn't planned. It's stumbled upon in the most unexpected way. In the early 1920s, H.B. Reese was working at the Hershey Chocolate Company in Pennsylvania. He was fascinated with candy making and decided to experiment on his own in his basement kitchen. Reese began tinkering with various fillings. But one day, he tried something different, mixing smooth peanut butter with Hershey's milk chocolate. At the time, peanut butter wasn't the household staple it is today. It was still considered a bit unusual. But when Reese poured the chocolate into little cups and spooned in the peanut butter, he created something extraordinary. His invention became so popular that by 1928, he had formed the H.B. Reese Candy Company, devoted entirely to his peanut butter cups. The peanut butter cup was unlike anything else. It was small, affordable, and perfectly blended salty with sweet. During the Great Depression, its low price made it accessible when other luxuries were out of reach. By the 1960s, Hershey had acquired the Reese Company, and the peanut butter cup had become a cornerstone of American candy culture. The twist? Reese's wasn't born from corporate brainstorming or high-tech food labs. It came from a factory worker experimenting in his own kitchen, simply playing with flavors. That small act of curiosity created one of the most iconic candies in American history, a treat that continues to be loved by children and adults alike. And while Reese's Cups were born from experimentation, another beloved treat came from nothing more than pure accident, a moment when sugar literally exploded. It's the fluffy, colorful treat every child begs for at the fair. But would you believe cotton candy was invented by a dentist? In 1897, dentist William Morrison and confectioner John C. Wharton teamed up in Nashville, Tennessee. Together, they created a machine that spun heated sugar through tiny holes, turning it into thin, thread-like strands. At first, the invention didn't even have a catchy name. they called it fairy floss. They introduced it to the world at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, where it was an immediate sensation. Crowds marveled at the strange, cloud-like treat, and more than 68,000 boxes of fairy floss were sold at 25 cents each, a hefty price at the time. The novelty of eating a sugary cloud captured the imagination of children and adults alike. Unlike traditional candies, cotton candy was light, whimsical, and fun to eat. It quickly became a staple at fairs, circuses, and amusement parks across America. The name cotton candy replaced fairy floss in the 1920s, and the treat became embedded in American nostalgia, tied to summertime, laughter, and joy. The twist: the very man who invented cotton candy was a dentist, a profession dedicated to preventing cavities. William Morrison may have unwittingly fueled generations of toothaches, but he also gave the world a food that symbolized pure delight. To this day, cotton candy remains a guilty pleasure, a reminder of childhood innocence spun from nothing but sugar and air. But while cotton candy floated into American hearts with a dentist's help, another food discovery began with a kitchen fire and ended with a bold, bubbly drink. The world's most luxurious drink wasn't designed by careful science. It was once considered a winemaking mistake. In the late 1600s, French winemakers in the Champagne region were struggling with a problem. Their wines, bottled too early in the cold climate, would sometimes undergo a second fermentation in spring. This unexpected process trapped carbon dioxide inside the bottle, causing corks to pop, and sometimes entire bottles to explode in the cellar. At first, this was a disaster. The popping wine was seen as unstable and dangerous. But a Benedictine monk named Dom Perignon began experimenting with methods to control the bubbles. He introduced stronger glass bottles, tighter corks, and careful blending techniques. Slowly, what was once considered a flaw turned into a prized feature. By the 18th century, champagne was no longer a winemaker's nightmare, but a symbol of celebration. Its fizz and sparkle made it unlike any other drink, and European aristocrats quickly adopted it for weddings, banquets, and toasts. Over time, champagne traveled to America, where it became linked with New Year's Eve, victories, and life's biggest milestones. The twist: the drink we now associate with elegance and success was once nicknamed the devil's wine because of its tendency to explode. Entire shipments could be ruined, and some winemakers feared it would ruin their livelihood. Yet what began as an accident of climate and chemistry became one of the most cherished beverages in the world. And while champagne was born from bottles bursting in French cellars, another beloved treat came from dough left forgotten overnight and gave us the perfect breakfast roll. That flaky, buttery pastry we pair with coffee today wasn't the result of a perfected recipe. It was the product of dough gone wrong. The origins of the croissant go back centuries, but the story most often told traces to Vienna in the late 1600s. Bakers there worked through the night, and one fateful evening, a batch of dough was left out too long. Instead of discarding it, the bakers folded and layered it with butter, creating a texture that was unlike traditional bread. When the Austrian pastry, known as the Kipferl, eventually reached France, local bakers refined the technique, making it lighter, flakier, and crescent-shaped. By the 19th century, the croissant, as we know, was firmly part of French breakfast culture, but its roots lay in an accident and an adaptation. The croissant stood out because it wasn't just bread, and it wasn't quite cake either. Its layers, crisp on the outside and soft inside, made it a treat that felt indulgent yet everyday. In France, it became associated with morning rituals and cafes, while in America, it emerged much later as a symbol of sophistication and European flair. The twist: the croissant, often thought of as purely French, has Austrian origins born out of a baker's mishap. It shows how accidents travel across cultures, get reshaped, and become national icons. What began as forgotten dough turned into one of the most recognizable pastries in the world. And while the croissant rose out of a baker's mistake, another favorite snack was born from a scientist's experiment with mold, changing medicine and food forever. One of the world's boldest cheeses began not as a recipe, but as a moldy accident. The story goes back to a small village in France. Centuries ago, a cheesemaker supposedly left a loaf of bread and some fresh cheese in a cool, damp cave. When he returned weeks later, he found the bread had molded, and that mold had spread into the cheese, streaking it with blue veins. Instead of throwing it away, he tasted it and discovered a sharp, tangy flavor unlike anything else. From this accident, the famous Roquefort cheese was born. Over time, cheesemakers refined the process, deliberately using Penicillium roqueforti mold and aging cheeses in caves to create consistency. What began as an accident of neglect evolved into a craft passed down for generations. Blue cheese stood out for its strong flavor and versatility. It paired with wine, elevated simple dishes, and became a delicacy on European tables. By the time it reached America, it was seen as a sophisticated food, one that added punch to salads, sauces, and steaks. For many, blue cheese was an acquired taste, but once acquired, it became a favorite. The twist? Well, most people would call spoiled food became a delicacy prized around the world. Mold, normally something we throw away, became the very essence of blue cheese. It's a reminder that sometimes accidents we'd rather avoid can turn into something extraordinary. And so, from moldy caves to modern kitchens, we see how chance shaped our food. These 15 accidental discoveries remind us that some of the world's greatest flavors weren't invented, they were stumbled upon. From potato chips born out of frustration, to chocolate chip cookies created by mistake, to champagne once feared as the devil's wine. The foods we know and love today weren't always planned. They were accidents, mishaps, even moments of forgetfulness. And yet, these happy accidents change the way we eat, celebrate, and remember our past. Each of these stories reminds us that history isn't just about grand events or famous figures. Sometimes, it's about small moments in ordinary kitchens, cellars, and fairs. Moments where something unexpected became unforgettable. So the next time you bite into a cookie, sip a glass of champagne, or enjoy an ice cream cone, remember, behind these everyday joys lies a story of chance, of discovery, and of America finding sweetness in the unexpected. This is the America we remember. If you enjoyed this trip through history's happy accidents, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. And tell us in the comments, which food's accidental invention surprised you the most?